6 years after the Bad Apple, Larry Boy would once again grace our screens with the League of Incredible Vegetables. On the surface, this episode seems like a natural evolution of Larry Boy. Great new characters and ideas that indicate a bright future for the series. Upon further inspection though, you can see the shaky ground that this episode was created under. The events that transpired over those 6 long years paint a picture of a studio surviving by the skin of its teeth. Classic Media's acquisition of Big Idea following their bankruptcy in no way spelled the end of their woes. Just a few months after the release of the Bad Apple, Classic Media's biggest competitor, Entertainment Rights, would acquire the company in full for $210 million, leaving Big Idea to become a subsidiary of a subsidiary. Business would continue as usual until, like many businesses during the 2008 recession, their new owners would experience extreme financial instability. So much financial instability, in fact, that they would have to make some drastic changes to management, switching out their CEO for Deborah Dugan, former CEO of Disney Publishing Worldwide. One of her key moves would be to lay off a third of the company's employees, but the move was futile. From £267 million to $5.5 million. Seeing no way out of this, Entertainment Rights was acquired by Boomerang Media, not to be confused with the Boomerang channel. Boomerang Media would then unify Entertainment Rights and their subsidiary Classic Media into one business, Classic Media. Big Idea would be kept as a separate subsidiary. Not confusing at all. It was as if every company that touched Big Idea was allergic to success. Somehow though, in spite of this lack of stability, Veggietales' videos would continue to be put out like nothing had changed. That is, until the acquisition that marks the beginning of the end for Veggietales would take place. Around the time that this acquisition of nightmares occurred, Larry Boy would receive his last episode in the show's original run, the League of Incredible Vegetables. While Junior, Laura, and Larry are visiting a museum, one of the items put on display known as the Fear Dar gets stolen by some penguins. A chase ensues with Larry Boy and his superhero friends known as the League of Incredible Vegetables. In no small part to Junior's assistance, the perpetrators get put into custody. Noticing Junior's contributions, Alfred puts him on the team and gives him his very own supersuit that makes him bouncy. While this is happening though, the penguins break out of captivity and retrieve the Fear Dar, a gun that is revealed by episode villain Dr. Alvin Fleury to freeze people with its power source being fear. Dr. Alvin Fleury does a test run in the city and is quickly confronted by the League of Incredible Vegetables. And just as it seems the League would stop him for good, Junior overestimates his powers and gets Larry Boy captured. The League wouldn't stand for this, so after a quick regroup they would try, and to their dismay fail, to save Larry Boy. Only Junior, who had been staying behind to listen to Alfred's teachings, could save the day. And so he did, as his new fear-free nature helps him take down Dr. Alvin Fleury once and for all. After such a long wait, the League of Incredible Vegetables pushes the Larry Boy franchise into a new direction, for better and for worse. The new characters are fantastic additions to the series, with Thingamabob being a particular highlight. The creatives behind the episode definitely made the right decision choosing Thingamabob over Bobbin. Vogue, Escape, and Ricochet also have a lot of entertaining moments. Having more heroes in Bumbleberg this time around forced the team behind the episode to yet again redesign the Larry Manor, featuring a brand new table as its centerpiece. The redesign would also involve implementing a far more intense lighting setup to match the new tone of the episode, a tone that makes the Bad Apple feel like the Dark Knight. If you were looking for a return to form, you definitely weren't going to get it here. If you can adjust to this new tone though, you will greatly appreciate the new Addams Family inspired villain, Dr. Alvin Fleury. He and his penguins make up much of the humor in the episode. This new tone also opens up the opportunity for a silly song, being the first in Larry Boy history. It's not groundbreaking, but it is humorous and a nice listen. What is groundbreaking, however, is being able to see Larry Boy in high definition, allowing you to clearly see the massive upgrade in shading that took place between the Bad Apple and League. Unfortunately, it also allows you to more clearly see where this episode falters. Bumbleberg has taken a massive hit in scale, feeling less like a city and more like a small town. Even the Fib from Outer Space dwarfs it. This mostly came as a result of the tighter budgets and increased output that, while also an issue during the Bad Apple, can really be seen here. A big part of what made Larry Boy was the production value and grandness of it all, making this one feel really out of place when stacked up against the previous 3D Larry Boy episodes. you just can't help but notice that this one feels like it is missing something. What clearly isn't missing something though is the theme song. Newsboys really knocked it out of the park with this one. All in all though, the League of Incredible Vegetables mostly just blends in with all the other Veggietales content that was coming out around the time. This isn't an indictment on the episode, but as a Larry Boy fan, it meant that the wait for a true continuation would start up yet again. Although what would happen next would make this hope become a fantasy. In an attempt to diverse their portfolio, DreamWorks would buy Classic Media for $155 million a few months before the release of The League of Incredible Vegetables. At first, the impact of this would be negligible. Big Idea continued to pump out Veggietales episodes as usual, just now under another umbrella. That was until 2014 when their new owners decided to make some changes. Extreme changes. Beauty and the Beat would mark the end of an era, with the Veggietales Netflix series releasing a month later. A series that would have a completely new art style and team producing it. While it seemed as though some more normal DVD releases would continue within this new art style, as they would go on to release another one in 2015, this would quickly prove itself to not be the case, as the staff that made them were all laid off. Mike Nawrocki as a writer? Gone. Kurt Heinecke as a composer? Gone. The original Veggietales series had met its end. What was it about this new show that would lead DreamWorks to kill off the immensely popular original series? Well, the answer can be pretty succinctly answered with streaming. Around the time of Veggietales' cancellation, DVD sales were plummeting industry-wide, being a third of what they were just 8 years prior. As a series that was exclusively released within this format, doom was all but inevitable. Veggietales would have to continue on in a new form, and thanks to their recent acquisition by DreamWorks, they would be able to make the transition. DreamWorks was particularly fit to assist with this pivot to streaming, as on June 17, 2013, they set up a deal with Netflix to distribute 300 hours of original content. Releasing amongst shows such as Turbo Fast and All Hail King Julian, Veggietales would get shaken up as a result of the transition. Seeing as the original series had been going on for a couple decades at this point and had been growing a bit stale, Big Idea figured that the switch to streaming was a perfect time to make some changes. A completely new team would be involved. A new art style created by Doug Tenpel would be introduced. A different tone would be adopted. All changes that would come together to make a show that is almost unrecognizable to what came before, and fans were not happy. Was the new show actually a downgrade, or was it just people adverse to change? I'll report back after watching the Larry Boy Veggietales in the House episodes.
Get off my lawn! Sure, it could be.
Okay, so I half agree with the fans. The changes made to this show turned it into something that it wasn't before. A show made entirely for kids. Let's say that there is a spectrum that goes from made for adults to made for children. The original Veggietales show would lean towards adults, having themes and characters that are fitting for kids, but many jokes and set pieces that can only be fully appreciated by adults. The Larry Boy animated series would lean towards children, still having some jokes for adults, but clearly being a bit more child-focused. Well, Veggietales in the House would just be for children. This isn't the end of the world, seeing as Veggietales has always been a series with children as their target demographic, but making it so that parents have nothing to take away removes one of the key selling points of the series. That your kid could watch it over and over and you wouldn't hate it. Heck, in the early days, a large portion of the people watching Veggietales were college students. Now that I've established that this series needs to be looked at as a show for a different demographic, aka not me as a 20-year-old, let's look at it on its own terms. Most Larry Boy Veggietales in the House episodes can be boiled down to the villain Motato and his minions wreaking havoc, with Larry Boy putting a stop to him. Along the way, a lesson is usually learned. Larry Boy also has a new League of Incredible Vegetables, featuring Junior Jetpack, Night Pony, and Bobbin. The premise gets quite repetitive, as you just beg for them to finally replace the wackily voiced Motato, but they just never do. For children though, you could easily see this as a good thing, as they can always know to expect some Motato antics when starting up an episode. Luckily, Veggietales in the City would come out after 4 seasons of Veggietales in the House to shake things up. Or, well, shaking things up is a bit of an exaggeration. They're still in a house, but now the inside is a bit more city-like. For the Larry Boy episodes in particular though, the main change is having a new villain, Apricot. The episode she is introduced in is actually a highlight of the series, as Apricot sneaking her way into the League of Incredible Vegetables just to sabotage them makes for a pretty interesting plot. Other than that though, there really isn't much to speak on about VeggieTales in the House/City. They are pretty forgettable shows, only notable for the changes made to the iconic original. Characters like Night Pony and Apricot do make for nice additions to the Larry Boy canon, but the way they were presented here was not ideal. The show would end in 2017, leaving Larry Boy and the VeggieTales franchise in a state of limbo. A limbo made even more uncertain as in 2016 yet another acquisition took place, with DreamWorks getting bought out by NBC Universal, which is in itself owned by Comcast. The future looked bleak for Larry Boy. It seems like this was the end, but out of nowhere some deals would be struck and the final era of Larry Boy would begin. Following the release of VeggieTales in the City, Phil Vischer would receive a phone call from a company previously unrelated to the VeggieTales brand, TBN. TBN, as it would turn out, had been in the process of licensing the VeggieTales characters from NBC Universal, and they wanted Vischer to play Bob. Having done this song and dance before, Vischer gave a firm no, as his previous performance of the Vegetables spat on his original creation. Upon further inspection though, he saw a show that appeared to be more substantive than the Netflix creation, something that truly had potential. And so his mind was changed, and he came along with the condition of being a voice actor and a writer. Mike Nawrocki and Kurt Heineke would be brought on too. A perfect storm was brewing for a revival worthy of the VeggieTales name. And as details were trickled out one by one, Larry Boy's return was revealed. His return wouldn't happen until a year after the show's first episode, but on November 23, 2020, Larry Boy would finally return, and Larry Boy and the Cape Coat Caper. Larry Boy superfan Collie tries to get a few pictures in the Larrymobile while Larry Boy is fighting a robber named Scalini. This goes sideways when Collie accidentally starts driving, ultimately ending in the vehicle getting totaled. Larry Boy went on to question Collie about what happened, and instead of offering the truth of the situation, she lies and says that the Cape Coat did it. Her lying continues over the episode as reporters slam Larry Boy more and more, until eventually the guilt gets to Collie. She approaches Larry Boy as Cape Coat and announces her intentions to not terrorize Bumbleberg anymore. But obviously this was a lie. Her refusal to tell the truth culminates in her having to get saved, and in the process getting revealed. Upon this reveal, she finally tells Larry Boy the truth. While sharing the same moral and plot structure as The Fib from Outer Space, the superfan angle differentiates the episode enough to justify its existence. It almost acts as a modern retelling of that episode. The episode also provides some references for longtime fans, such as the pogo stick from the animated series and some Larry Boy posters. One of the posters is actually a render made by Nintega Dario and Nibrock Rock. Written by comic book writer Adam Beechin, the quality of this episode sits somewhere between the League of Incredible Vegetables and Larry Boy and the Bad Apple. It would be nice to see some more originality and improved animation, but all in all, this episode is a massive breath of fresh air after the Netflix series. What would come next? Well, we would find out half a year later when Larry Boy and the Angry Eyebrows Trouble released. A happiness parade is happening in Bumbleberg, and awful Alvin is mad about it. He wants everyone to be angry, and the parade is not aiding that goal. To remedy the situation, he unleashes some angry eyebrows to distract everyone while he fudges the ballot to get himself in power. Knowing that something's up, Mayor Blueberry chooses Larry Boy instead, making Alvin even angrier. So angry in fact that he decides to unleash all his angry eyebrows across Bumbleberg. One by one, the citizens are taken over, eventually getting even Larry Boy. Alfred is left as the only one still free from the eyebrows' control, so he relays a Bible verse about not holding on to anger. This verse spreads around town and the eyebrows are released. Following the eyebrows' release, Larry Boy tries to catch them, but then they attack Alvin instead. Wait, haven't we heard this plot before? Well, this episode is actually a straight up remake of the original animated series episode, but modernized. The writer of the original episode is actually credited because they're so similar. This definitely doesn't push the series in a more original direction, but it honestly isn't really a problem because of how many minor things they changed. It's basically like if the original Awful Alvin episode had the tone and characters of the 3D ones. This naturally leads to some very fan-servicey moments like seeing Alvin's lair in 3D. I just couldn't stop smiling while watching the episode. Everything was executed perfectly. The music that was composed by Kevin Manthei fits the episode just right, as he had composed for Batman series in the past. Really, the only way that the music disappoints is in the theme song. It's not a bad song, but when compared to the leaked original version that remixes the Fib from Outer Space theme, it pales in comparison. Regardless, this episode is a must-watch for all Larry Boy fans. Will the next episode, Larry Boy and the Emperor of Envy, also be a must-watch? After tackling some burglars, the League of Incredible Vegetables decide to go to a slushie contest. Unbeknownst to them though, the Emperor, a cherry tomato trying to take over Bumbleberg, licks the slushies with envy juice, a juice that makes whoever envies sleepy. This wouldn't be much of a problem, but then the Emperor makes them all envious, making them ripe for capture, and capture them he does, as the town is ready to be subjected to his evil plan, his plan to shrink the town to make himself bigger in comparison. The League, upon regaining consciousness, quickly realizes that envy was the source of their problems thanks to Alfred, so they decide to be grateful instead. This action immediately frees them, allowing the League to confront the Emperor and bring everyone back to normal size. Based on the 2002 book of the same name, Larry Boy and the Emperor of Envy is yet another hit, in big part because of how many memorable moments there are. I mean, to start off, the episode is way more funny than it has any right to be. I don't think any Larry Boy episode has made me laugh out loud harder than the Junior right size gag.
I am so grateful that God made me just the perfect size.
The cherry tomato being envious over larger tomatoes is also such a funny motivation. He is also made to be unbelievably unhinged as he shrinks the town in a way that makes him out to be a real threat. This episode also marks the return of the League, except this time they get a full-size town with beautiful background illustrations to explore. The new League of Incredible Vegetables theme is quite a bit more amateurish than the original, but it has a charm to it. No surprise that the episode is quality though, as the writer of Lego My Ego returns in this one. 3 Larry Boy episodes in and there hasn't been a single miss. Does Larry Boy and the Menacing Mushroom follow up this streak? After a battle with scallions, the League starts to hold grudges on each other as a reporter sprays grudge dust on them. The grudges eventually lead to the group's disbandment, as the reporter reports to her boss, the Menacing Mushroom. In a moment of clarity, the reporter questions her actions, but then the mushroom mind controls her to get them back on the same page. The real plan of getting huge could finally commence, although it would fail fairly quickly as Junior manages to get the League back to normal, and the mushroom is defeated. This episode is not terrible, but a bit underwhelming. The mushroom lair looks very detailed and nice, but the rest of the episode just comes off as kind of forgettable. Interesting ideas were laid out, like the menacing mushroom getting treated worse because he's botanically not a vegetable, but weren't executed to their fullest potential. It also follows the big villain at the end trope to fairly little effect. Let's see if Larry Boy and the awful Alvin's Grudge can get back on track. Following his imprisonment, Alvin decides to get his revenge by picking off the League one by one until only Larry Boy remains. Alvin would then escape prison and start his final mission to destroy Bumbleberg. Larry Boy tries to stop him, but his insecurities that mounted over the episode worsen to a point that they are crippling. The League reassures him of his strength though, and he takes down Alvin. This episode improves on the last one by leaps and bounds. The detective element adds a new part of Batman that hadn't been spoofed in any prior Larry Boy episodes. It really shakes things up. Another way this episode shakes things up is by being surprisingly violent. I definitely didn't expect to see the League getting injured one by one when starting the episode up. Nothing too crazy, but still a bit of a surprise. Nothing would be as surprising as how the series would end though. On the seemingly random day of June 29th, 2021, Phil Vischer would tweet out this: "Mike and Kurt were fired 5 to 7 years ago to save money. Mike and I recently asked to have a larger role other than freelance voice talent. We were told no, and our voices are now being recast." The news was a complete shock. Hadn't the draw of the Veggietales Show been that they were writing? Hadn't Phil Vischer only returns because he could write this time? When were they told no? Well, it turned out that things were not as they seemed. One thing I failed to mention was that none of the Larry Boy episodes were written by Mike Nawrocki or Phil Vischer. This is noteworthy because it was said that Phil Vischer would be writing the first 10 episodes, and Mike Nawrocki would be writing the last 8. But I guess this was not so. There was also studio interference. According to Phil Vischer, Mr. Lunt's teeth were removed because of DreamWorks. This, while minor on the surface, could indicate that even in the beginning, the creatives had less of a say than was thought. This could even be the cause of the Larry Boy theme not making it in. Although at this point we are firmly in speculation territory. Regardless, Veggietales and in turn Larry Boy are dead. The Veggietales show has ended, Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki have moved on, and what remains is a husk of what was previously there. A mere imitation. People who quite literally learned about Veggietales through Wikipedia articles are in control now. The story of how Larry Boy met its end is an all too familiar one. A story of constant corporate consolidation until those at the bottom have their soul ripped out by people who barely even know what it is. Those who brought Larry Boy to life fought to the very end, putting out some surprisingly good material. But in the end, they were no match against the people who owned their very IP. In the end though, I can't help but appreciate what we did get. We got a whole mountain of amazing media that has stuck with us since release. And when I feel like checking out this classic character again, the episodes that have been produced over the years will always be there. Thanks for watching.